Hi, this is Jonathan Slater, host of Tête-à-Tête Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies. Tête-à-Tête is a production of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies, Association d'études juives canadiennes. As the saying goes, to go is to return. So after an absence of more than a decade, Parchment, Canada's only Jewish literary journal, is back. Parchment seems to be doing what no other literary outlet is doing, offering a reliable avenue for Canadian Jewish writers to share their work. And they're accomplishing this within the realities of today's Jewish cultural landscape. The journal is purposely inclusive and strictly nonpartisan, designed so that an array of Canadian Jewish literary creators can find a welcoming home where readers will come and visit and even stay. My guest today on the podcast is Parchment's editor-in-chief, Orly Zebak. Orly's biography reads like that of someone who has literature in her veins. From her perch of literary maven and part-time stand-up comic, she brings with her a wealth of experience that will lend a fresh perspective to the journal's reboot. Orly, welcome to Tête-à-Tête.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Orly, let's talk about you. You're not new to the world of literary journals. You already possess an impressive background in publishing. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about that and the way your prior experience led you into the universe of Parchment?
Yes, of course. So I started out, I would say, all my experience comes from Brick, a literary journal. I started there as a volunteer and then a publishing assistant, and now I'm the managing editor. And the team there really mentored me and taught me so much about what it means to produce a literary journal and what the literary means. And I think I learned how to be an editor there and a reader there.
This is a Canadian literary journal, yes?
It's a Canadian journal. We publish writers from around the world, but it's based in Toronto. It started out in London in 1977. And it's evolved and changed. Michael Ondaatje was the editor,
Oh,
and
wow.
his partner Linda Spalding for about 30 years. And we have a very heavy-hitting editorial board, Dion Brand, Madeline Tien, David Cheriandy, amongst other wonderful folks as well.
So you said it taught you to be an editor and a reader. Could you say a little bit more about that? What do you mean by that? It's a curious way to express it.
Yeah, I think for reading, first of all, normally it probably feels like the job of a reader is the most boring, tedious task. And that's maybe why you think, oh, people volunteered to do it or it's a volunteer position. But I think it's as a reader that you develop a really great eye for what a journal wants or does not want. You get to understand through sharing your selections with an editor on the team what would work best for the journal. And you start to read not perhaps necessarily as guided by what my personal taste preference is, but what is the right fit for the journal. And that takes some time, I think, to develop. And I also think it makes you become a better writer and editor because eventually, which happened to me, is while I read, I can already, after reading so many submissions, you start to realize like the common elements of things you would want to fix with a piece, whether they don't weave enough of the art when they're talking about the personal, which is something very specific to Brick. But you learn how to develop an opinion, and you also learn how to understand what would work best for the journal.
It was interesting, the phrase you used to develop an eye. And it's funny because I always associate reading and not, professional reading as you're talking, but I always associate reading with hearing, hearing an author's voice. For me, reading is a very auditory experience. Does any of that come into play when you're looking at these contributions?
For me, not really. I shared a piece with the editorial board for this upcoming round of Parchment that I heard first, and it made me laugh so much as an audience member. But typically, I actually have a very hard time paying attention to audio. books, for instance, so it's really hard for me to focus.
Oh, interesting.
And I find the same for readings as well.
It's a visual experience for you.
F
Yeah.
For me more so,
Wow.
yes. But
Okay.
I think poetry is different.
How so? How so? I'm curious. Why is poetry different for you?
There's more of a I don't know if it's like a dance that goes on vocally that I find. There's more of a performative aspect to it. So I'm able to engage I think in a deeper way when I hear poetry than other mediums. Although I love interviews also. That's kind of the exception. I can listen to interviews for hours.
Well, I'm going to circle back to poetry in a little while, but I want to talk more about Parchment. The launch is obviously it's a refresh for the publication. And you've made a concerted effort to acknowledge and visibly preserve its connection to the original journal. So, for instance, Ruth Panofsky, and Ruth's been on this podcast. We had her on a few months ago last year. Ruth's the former editor of Parchment, and she sits on your advisory board. The poet Shel Krakowski was the journal's first editor and is among the contributors to this first issue of the revitalized Parchment. So, why was it important to implement such a foundational connection from the start?
I just first want to say that Shell and Ruth have been absolutely amazing in the advice they've given me and in the support and their enthusiasm for the project as well, for the revitalization of Parchment. I think it's really important to honor what Parchment was and the folks that contributed to it. And they have so much experience that I'd want to glean from, and that I think they have so much life experience that, for instance, with Shell specifically, because he has a piece in the spring issue that speaks to the founding of Parchment. And that's fascinating to me. That's really where everything began, and why not get these kernels of wisdom from Shell and take them, not just, he probably would have told me all of this, perhaps not in such a literary way over the phone, but why not offer that to everyone and also let folks know how important Parchment was all those years ago, because we're going to have a new generation of readers that don't know anything about Parchment's history and what made it so special and all the things that they did and the writers that were part of that first 16 issues.
So honoring this legacy, this is not a one-off thing just for the first issue or first couple of issues. This is something that you plan on embedding almost like spiritually into the publication and carrying it forward into the future.
I would hope so. I don't know exactly but I think the design will always carry an element of the past. I mean, our designer Mark really looked at the old issues of Parchment as inspiration, and we wanted to have a connection to how it visually looked as well. So they're similar in size, and it was interesting. I received the proof from the printer, and Mark was there too. We're holding the first issue of Parchment and the 17th issue of Parchment, which is this issue. And side by side, they felt connected, even though they look kind of different. Not kind of, they really look different, but it felt like this, that was the Parchment that, would have existed in 1992. And this is the Parchment that would exist and does exist in 2026.
Well, I'm glad you brought up design because I did want to talk more about design because obviously it's a major element of Parchment's look and feel. I don't have the print edition yet in my hands, but I did have the wonderful opportunity in preparation for this podcast to look at close to a final reader's proof, and the layout and the typesetting are definitely inviting. I find them appealing, and you've also included illustrations in this issue, artwork by Bernice Eisenstein. Can you say more about the design choices? Well, you already spoke a little bit about it, but a little bit more about the design that inspired Parchment's visual landscape and this decision to incorporate Bernice Eisenstein's creations throughout the journal.
Yeah, so for how the magazine looks, we were so intentional about wanting it to be an inviting reading experience where you kind of just focus on the page and don't get distracted. At one point, there was a conversation about whether we needed to have headers listing the name of the contributor, within the section of their own piece. And because of the shape of the page, the size of the page, and how the text sits on the page, we thought it would have been distracting. It would look probably too squishy or too tight, and we didn't want the reader's eye to drift away from the text and focus on the last name, for instance, of a contributor, because it could end up, not being spaced far enough from the text or would look awkward.
So tell me about Bernice's role in this journal. And those illustrations are just wonderful and compelling.
I find Bernice to be brilliant. She's also been the source of wisdom for me. She sits on the editorial board as well and was just so invested in the design of Parchment as well, not just the illustrations, but we really wanted to make sure that her illustrations weren't spot art.
What do you mean by that? I'm not familiar with that term.
So spot art is like, let's say, you have a piece on soccer and we'll put in a soccer ball.
Oh, so it's something that you just find something pertinent and drop it in.
We really wanted, and Bernice wanted, that her illustrations, almost even though they're in connection with Parchment and they refer back to craftsmanship and history, and they bring, we have like Walter Benjamin's library card in the back. We have
Yes,
a portrait
that's fascinating.
of Primo Levi. And, these are all, they're not Canadian, but they are influential and have shaped literature. And so we're creating a correspondence between our past and present and the folks that influenced us. And her pieces tell a story on their own, her artwork within the issue, that I think if you took away the text, even though they're meant to be in tandem with the text as well, they tell their own story.
Yeah, that's why I used the word compelling, because that was my feeling, that there was a narrative even behind. Were you familiar with Bernice's work before you got involved with Parchment?
I actually interviewed Bernice, oh my gosh, maybe like 4 years ago during COVID or just near the end of COVID. I interviewed her for Neve, which is the online digital arts and culture Jewish magazine I co-founded with my friend. And so I interviewed Bernice years ago about her window gallery that she had set up in Fenster, which was the window gallery in, it used to be beside, like in Kensington. And so Bernice had a gallery, an exhibit, I should say, had an exhibit at Fenster, which was a window gallery. And Fenster was celebrating their, I think it was 10, gosh, they were celebrating an anniversary, and I interviewed Bernice.
Oh, wow. So let's talk about this notion of an effective literary journal. Okay. What makes for an effective literary journal, Orly? And more specifically, what makes for an effective Canadian Jewish literary journal? Is there a distinction or is it the same?
I think that's a hard question. Is there a distinction? I think what makes any good literary journal is you have to feel close to the writing. The way, I always describe it that I feel really close to the page when I'm reading something really great, and it'll literally feel like I have it smacked right on my face. And that's how I feel every piece in a literary journal should make you feel, that you can feel the essence of the author, the story they're saying, the stanza they're writing, that they're right beside you. Perhaps maybe they feel like a friend or an adversary, but that you feel close to them in a kind of like elevated way, I would say.
And you used this term essence earlier to describe that feeling. Is this essence for you? Because we talked about, your sensorial experience with reading as being more visual, mine being more auditory. So it's this sense when you say that the author is next to you, is nearby. Is that like a visual feeling for you? That in fact the author is sort of standing, maybe looking over your shoulder or next to you? Because for me, I never get that experience. To me, it's always in my head as a voice.
I would say it's in my head and in my this is so cheesy, but, like, in my heart, and gosh, when I read something that's so great, I get, goosebumps, and that's that's to me how I feel, like, in the most literal sense and essence.
So do you want other people to get goosebumps? Because what I want to know is whatever effect that you're going to generate with this, with Parchment, with this journal, is it's got to motivate people to subscribe, right? They're going to subscribe, they're going to pick up a copy, and either they're going to, hear a voice or see a vision or get goosebumps, but you want them to keep coming back for more, right? So what's going to motivate people to renew that subscription and keep coming back for more Parchment?
I hope at least one piece makes someone get goosebumps. That's the dream. It's hard to do, and I hope we can do that for readers. I just honestly want readers to enjoy reading the stories and essays and poems by our writers. And I want them to feel that we have encapsulated a part of the Canadian Jewish experience as it is, as it was, as it could be in an issue. It's difficult to do that because everyone has different experiences while they're reading or different experiences they're coming to the journal with. But I hope that at least one piece will make them think, there's something in here that will bring me back. Um, Maybe it's just Bernice's illustrations, which is okay too.
When I was a kid reading The New Yorker, it was, always their cartoons and artists that attracted me. So you see this as perhaps a discovery process for your readers, learning about or at least coming into contact with Canadian Jewish writers, with literature that they otherwise might not be accessing?
The mark for me personally as a reader, and because I don't know what people necessarily want for themselves as a reader, but what I always hope for when I'm reading is to have these moments of discovery, is to leave with asking questions about the world or seeing the world in a different way. Perhaps not in a way that I agree with or that repaints the world in a way that I don't even, want to admit, perhaps.
In what way? Socially, politically, culturally?
I think in all those ways, for me as a reader, I think I've often gone to literature to escape but also to learn. But gosh, when something kind of is so sad or joyless, I almost want to ignore it or pretend come up with an alternative ending for what I've just
Oh,
read.
how interesting. So if you find something too despairing or too dismaying, it's off-putting to you, or you just wanna rewrite it, you sort of play it out in your head in a different way?
Yeah, it'll make me very sad. I've done it I have a habit of doing this with, like, films also, like, when I watched Titanic, which for a long time I didn't realize, or perhaps this was my subconscious, or maybe I did and I chose to ignore it, that Jack dies at the end, he drowns, and I said, "No, but in that flashback at the end," I was like, "That's what actually
Oh,
happens,"
okay.
or in
Okay.
which is
Okay.
nonsensical, and then you have Parasite also. I loved Parasite so much, the film, and at the end, the father will end up being stuck in that family's basement probably forever, and I just wanna believe that the son earns enough money, if I'm remembering the storyline of the film, but earns enough that he could buy that house and free his father from the basement, but that would it's impossible.
So it sounds like you've got a career as a Philip K. Dick writing alternate histories,
Alternate
alternate realities to get you out of the unpleasantness of of
unpleasant.
real realities, which tend to be fictional anyhow.
Anyway,
I wanted to talk about poetry, Orly, because in your preface to the first edition, you draw our attention, you draw the reader's attention to the abundance of poetry in this first issue. And I got a confession to make. I'm not immediately drawn to poetry. I don't know why. I had a lot of poetry, in school and reading it and writing it. So I'm not immediately pulled into poetry as a genre. But I do find the poems in this first issue quite compelling, and some of them are very haunting. You started talking a little bit about poetry earlier, but what was the rationale behind the robust inclusion of poetry in this first edition? And can the readers look forward to more poetry in the future?
There will definitely be poetry in the future. I would say each issue will be different in how many of each genre appears. But this issue, the first issue, gosh, there was no rationale behind it. I wanted to say
Okay,
that
next
when we
question. No, just
yeah.
kidding.
Yeah, there was I mean, it was just the writing. It was just the submissions we received and the writing and what we were drawn to and what the editors were drawn to as well. And when there's such strong writing, it's hard to say no. And I think I wouldn't have wanted us to say no just because we had this initial idea of let's make it balanced, let's have 4 poems, 4 pieces of fiction, 4 essays. This issue has 1 piece of fiction and then many poems and a sprinkle, no, I would say a good amount of nonfiction in
Right,
there.
right. Are you a fan of
Yeah.
poetry?
I am a fan of poetry. I am maybe not the most well read in poetry, but I do really love it. I like the rhythm of it. And I like the sense of the unknown that I get from reading a poem. I don't think I always figure it out.
Do you react to sad poems? Because some of these poems are sad, sometimes in a subtle way.
Oh,
Do you react to sad poems the same way you react to sad fiction? Do you try and reimagine a different stanza?
oh my gosh. Not really, but with poetry, I find that I can reread a poem and a line will hit me differently after like the 5th time, and I'll be like, oh, I think I got it now.
Yeah.
It takes me some time. I think we were reading one of the poems in the issue. I think we were at the 3rd printout, and one line from a poem just for that moment made me like it kind of like pierced me in a way that it hadn't happened before.
Well, that's a great experience that a line of poetry can have that sort of effect on you.
Yeah, and I think fiction can as well, and nonfiction too. But for poetry, for me at least, I do find that it's not as on the nose per se. Like it's harder for me to sort out my emotions while I'm reading a poem because I don't necessarily understand a poem immediately,
Right.
or perhaps I'll never understand it, but there's something there anyway. I mean, it's so enjoyable to read a poem out loud. There's a rhythm, there's song in it in a more overt way than in most fiction or poetry.
Hey, it's Colin Weiser here, Director of York University's Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies, booster, collaborator, and friend of all the great things the ACJS is up to. Our center is an interdisciplinary hub for research about Jewish life and culture. We've long been a leader in academic Jewish studies in general and have been particularly proud of our rich history in producing and promoting Canadian Jewish studies in particular. We've been and remain the academic home to some great scholars of Canadian Jewish life, including some of its pioneers, our beloved colleagues of blessed memory, Irving Abella and Michael Brown. Over many decades now, we've hosted CanCon Jewish Studies Symposia, conferences, music events, public talks and panels, including the ACJS's 2026 annual conference to be held from May 31st until June 2nd. York's library system is the electronic home for the scholarship published in Canadian Jewish Studies, Études Juives Canadiennes. The center is also pleased to support the ACJS's new literary journal, Parchment, and I'm particularly proud that our center brought the ACJS under its aegis back in 2024. If you'd like to learn more about the Koshitsky Center's year-round cultural programming in all areas of Jewish studies, shoot us an email at cjs@yorku.ca. We look forward to hearing from you.
Orly, you write in your opening remarks to the first issue of Parchment, there has been a silencing of Jewish voices, whether or not they're writing on Jewish themes. I've even heard the word in various places, muzzling, used in this context. There have been a fair amount of conversations in the literary space about the pressures facing Jewish authors nowadays. Now, in his comments to the Canadian Jewish News about Parchment's launch, the Age CJS's Josh Tapper emphasized the important role of Parchment in fostering, and these are his words, community in an environment in which some of those opportunities for community building for Jewish writers might have been circumscribed or closed off. Obviously, the whole Canadian Jewish literary enterprise since October 23 is navigating much changed waters than, say, at the inception of Parchment back in 1992. Now, I'm thinking about you in this environment, and I'm thinking that all of this places an extraordinary amount of weight on your editorial shoulders. So my question is, what sort of opportunities, and at the same time, what sort of risks for Parchment and its contributing authors do you see arising from the challenges that Jewish authorship and Jewish literary endeavors are facing right now in 2026 and possibly, I hate to say it, well into the future?
Ooh, it is a huge responsibility and weight, and it can keep you up at night thinking about it.
I'm sure.
Because I think there's an earnestness that I always want to maintain and a keenness to trying to really rebuild a community that can gather together and honestly just talk. Now, here we're talking through literature to one another, but I think people are divided. People don't talk to folks they don't share the same opinions with. And I honestly just want Parchment to be a place where different voices can gather and be in conversation with one another. I understand that that is very difficult to do because you're trying to also get it right, if that makes sense.
Well, in your opinion, what does that mean, get it right? I mean, when I hear get it right, I think of working towards some good. So what is the good that you're working toward here?
The good that we're working towards, or that I feel that we're working towards, is trying to bring everyone who sits on all side of any aisles together, that a reader who thinks one way can find themselves in our pages. A reader who thinks another way can find themselves in our pages. And the same for, I would say, writers too, for readers and writers who might feel ostracized by one side can find a home in Parchment and can feel included and can feel that we're really trying to build a landscape where the writing is being accepted and edited, and to feel that there are writers right now who don't submit or who don't want to submit to certain places because of the silencing that's going on. I hope that we are seen as an inviting place. I also say in my editorial note that we might get things wrong, and I welcome letters from readers and writers. And I also ask myself, like, how do we know we're doing enough? Or how are we going to be able to measure that goodness or that rightness? And I think that's really what the success or the legacy of Parchment will be. We are saying we're a place for contemporary Canadian Jewish writing, and we want to show the Canadian Jewish experience. Well, let's really try to do that. And I think that's where that goodness rests, because if you can do it honestly and with heart and with gumption and with frankness, and also, if we fudge up, which I hope we won't, but I just hope we can be a place that people can come and sit with their emotions and thoughts and kind of leave all the barriers and divisions behind them for a little bit.
Well, in a way, what you're saying is it's sort of intangible, but if you can draw people in and keep them interested, that's sort of a testament to the effectiveness of what you're attempting to do, the work that you're attempting to accomplish, and the goal and this essence that you want readers to extract from Parchment.
Yeah, it's like a family dinner. You go to a family dinner, you have a bunch of people on different sides of the aisle, different perspectives on everything, whether or not they like gefilte fish, which is like such a corny joke I'm making right now.
Oh, that's
But
the comic in you
it's like-
talking. I was
but
going to
it's
say
just
you could propose a subtitle for Parchment, like a family dinner.
like a family dinner. Yeah, not all families get along, but, I really want it to feel like a Passover Seder where you're there for hours just talking and feeling your feelings. And maybe you're arguing, but then you're hugging, and you have an uncle trying to convince you of something, but then what does he know in the end?
But that's such a lovely, warm vision. That's a terrific metaphor, actually. I like that.
I mean, yes, it's metaphors often can times be clearer to say than the actual thing. Maybe, I don't know, there's something in there that perhaps if I had a therapist, they could get into, but I
Well,
have you,
I
Jonathan.
think if we all had therapists, we could get to the bottom of these metaphors, right? But talking about metaphors, I want to go back to my metaphor of return that I introduced at the beginning of the podcast. So if we go back to this initial reference of returning, it's a mixed bag, right? Because the leitmotif of return in contemporary literature is often portrayed as an impossible homecoming, right? It doesn't work. Don't do it. Don't try it. It's going to have, you know, unforeseen outcomes. But yet here we are, Orly, you and I, and we're speaking of the possible. The reintroduction of Parchment has, of course, benefited from a close and productive relationship between the journal and the ACJS, which took the initiative to include Parchment among the association's growing Canadian Jewish media offerings. And we include the podcast among those offerings, with the ACJS executives David Kaufman and Josh Tapper serving as executive editors of the publication. So, what, in your view, does this relationship mean for Parchment's prospects and future direction? And what can readers look forward to?
So I would say Parchment is trying to build a community of readers and writers. And David and Josh have given Parchment its own community within the ACJS, that I feel that Parchment is already in a community while it's trying to build its own community that is not separate from the ACJS, that perhaps will have fans that take part in Tete-a-Tete and the academic journal and all the other initiatives going on. Maybe we'll be able to build off of the following that's already there in the community, that's already there in the connections. But I think it's given us already legs to stand on. It's really hard to start an independent journal and you're on your own, and Parchment has never been on its own because of David, Josh, and the ACJS. And I have never been on my own because of David, Josh, the editorial and advisory board, and Adam Saul, the literary director, and my team.
That's terrific.
But I think without the ACJS, Parchment doesn't have that foundation. None of these people, none of these things would be part of it. And I think what the ACGS gives Parchment is a real opportunity for growth. And because of the support they have for Parchment and the dreams they have for Parchment. And also, the ACJS is building this network of projects to keep the family metaphor going, almost like cousins, I would say. Like, no one is on an island by themselves running their organization. There's a backbone. There's, vines that crisscross between organizations.
Again, these great metaphors. I love it. And it's very expressive. And I think that it really conveys how this journal is being revitalized and how it's going to be approaching the future. Orly, thank you so much for taking us inside Parchment. I can't wait to receive my first issue in the mail. As I said earlier, I worked off of a reader's proof to get ready for our conversation, but I can't wait to open my mailbox and pull out this paper, this print edition, and read through it again. I think it's going to be exciting, and maybe there'll be someone, in essence, standing by me as I read these poems and these fiction pieces. Anyhow, thanks again, Orly. I really appreciated your time with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jonathan, and you'll have to let me know.
I'll send you a letter.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'll check my mailbox.
Excellent. I'm Jonathan Slater, and you've been listening to Tête-à-Tête. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks to our guest, the very insightful Orly Zebak. This show was produced and edited by Theodora Draper in Toronto. Our music is provided by J.K. Bradley. Our executive producers are Joshua Tapper and David Kaufman. Tête-à-Tête is a podcast of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. You can find out more about the ACJS and link to our journal and past podcast episodes by checking out our website, acjs-aejc.ca. We're grateful to our supporters, the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council's Aid to Scholarly Journals program, and the J. Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry. In the show notes, you can find a transcript of my conversation with Orly Zebak and a subscription link to the print edition of Parchment. You can also order print copies of current and past issues of the ACJS journal, Canadian Jewish Studies, Études Juives Canadiennes. We'd love it if you could share, like, and rate our podcast. You're also invited to add your email to the ACJS's occasional newsletter or support the ACJS's amazing work by following links in the show notes. If you have comments or thoughts about this podcast episode or any other of our episodes, feel free to email us at acjs@yorku.ca. Come back and join us for another conversation.